There aren't many 100-year-olds that adopt a tech strategy, but the ACLU is an exception. Here's Marco Carbone, CTO of the ACLU, and Alan Tan, Product Design Lead at ACLU, along with Megan Rose Dickey, Senior Reporter at TechCrunch.
Oh, Donald Glover.
Hey everyone, hope you're having a good day here so far. I think we're all pumped to be here, so thanks for joining us. So Marco, tell me how did the ACLU come to start a tech team? Because I know that you were at the ACLU since 2012.
Yes. So we always had like a small web development, web technology operation within the ACLU that I was leading, but in a very traditional nonprofit sort of way, very small team, relying heavily on outside vendors and consultants to do our work. And then the election happened, 2016 election, and we had an initial outpouring of support right after the election.
I think it was what, 9 million in the first week?
Well, no. What's that?
Was it 9 million within the first week?
The first no, so that was right after the election. It wasn't quite that big, but then it was after the inauguration.
Oh, okay.
And then the Muslim, the executive order that Trump signed, the Muslim ban, and the ACLU went to court the very next day, got a temporary injunction. It's a moment that was heavily shared on social media, and in that first weekend, it was over $24 million that we raised on very aging legacy enterprise nonprofit technology. And at that moment, our executive director started hearing actually a lot from Silicon Valley and other influencers around the country, and asking, okay, so what's your technology leadership at the organization? And his answer was there was none at the senior level. And so he started, that's sort of I think when he started thinking more seriously about the opportunities that we may have missed by not having a mature tech and data operation at the ACLU at the time. So it took a few months to sort of happen, but now I've been in the role as CTO for about 1.5 years, and we've grown more than 3x in that time, and we have a product, I would call it a pretty functional product and technology team. Yeah.
Nice. And so you became CTO after the ACLU went through Y Combinator, which is a Silicon Valley accelerator.
Yes.
So what happened in that accelerator, and did that kind of lead to?
So we didn't go through the accelerator in the traditional sense. It was I think it was sort of reported that way, but that's not really how it played out. Really, it was our executive director Anthony Romero talking to Sam Altman, and he invited him to come to demo day and kind of see what the Y Combinator experience was like. And actually, some Y Combinator then tapped their network and said, hey, we've got 2,000 volunteers that can help you guys out right now because we know that you need some technology help, and that actually did come to pass. Some of their volunteers worked on building up our distributed organizing movement, which is called People Power, and then some other ones came in and just helped us, fight some aging infrastructure battles that we just needed capacity at that time. But then, as part of those conversations, that's I think where Anthony, our ED, started to realize that technical leadership was part of the thing that he needed to build at the ACLU. So it came out of those conversations, and with YC, but with other folks.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so for the most recent midterm elections, I know that you both Marco and Alan worked on a couple of products, kind of gearing up for that. Alan, could you kind of talk a little bit about those products and what led you to create them?
Sure. Yeah. So when our team first started out, we were starting to build up our team and to try to get a sense of what our capabilities would be, and also within the organization, we didn't really have an in-house product function or in-house design or tech function, so we were looking for a small project that could help show other people in the organization what we could do. And so one of the first projects we did was something to show people what their congressional districts look like over time. What did it look like in 1960 coming up to now? And that was kind of tied to some of the work that we knew would happen during the midterm elections, because we wanted to show people who their reps were. So we started to think about if you put in your address, who represents you, and what does your congressional district look like? And so I'll talk a bit more about the larger voting program we built for the midterms, which is primarily a get out the vote program. We were focused on local races in particular because after the 2016 election, people were feeling pretty bummed out about the presidential position and weren't feeling like they could make that much of a difference. So we really wanted to tell people it's not just about these high profile races that matter, but local races matter just as much. Who your local county sheriff is extremely important in terms of immigration or policing. And so we wanted to make sure we told people how much their vote mattered. Yeah, so I come from a media background. I spent 5 years at the New York Times. And so when I was there, we spent a lot of time thinking about different formats and how do you provide the right level of information and use the right level of language for explaining really complex, dense topics to people. And so with the Voter Project, we had worked very closely with our organizing team, who is also a fairly new team within the ACLU. They were formed in 2017. And so they were very committed to making voting rights a big part of their work during the midterms. And we were kind of working with them pretty closely to decide what information do people need to know, what information do people not have when they go to the polls, and how can we provide that in plain language.
And the other thing we wanted to do then is have ACLU members and supporters start identifying themselves as an ACLU voter, thinking about when they go into the ballot box, we wanted civil liberties and civil rights issues to be at the forefront of people's minds. And in the 2018 midterms, the ACLU played a supporting role in the Florida restoration of rights to vote for people with felony convictions and voter registration in Nevada and Michigan. And we believe overall that it impacted over 2 million people's right to vote. So that was working with coalitions. It wasn't just the ACLU, but it was a big part of the midterms. Yeah.
Nice. And I want to talk a little bit more about the What the District product. How did your team land on that product and determining that, oh, this is something that we need to provide as a service to people?
I mean, yeah. So it was a conversation with our voting rights project, partially, right? And so, we wanted. And also it kind of started with an existing data set. Like we knew that we had this access through a professor. Do you remember where?
Yeah, I don't remember the university, but it's this one person who has been compiling shapefiles for different congressional districts for years now. It's just one person.
So we knew we had the access to this data set. It seemed like a great opportunity to show people almost an animation of what their district would look like over the past 50 years as it changed. And so talking with our Voting Rights Project, we said, well, can this be a way to talk about gerrymandering as an issue? And they said, well, yes, but not always. Like just because your district looks funny, it doesn't mean that there was malicious gerrymandering at play. But it's still important to show people that your congressional district actually is sort of arbitrary, and like who you vote with, like your community that you vote with, actually changes over time. So like if you look at my neighborhood in New York, like sometimes I'm voting with I live in near Park Slope. Sometimes I'm voting with Park Slope and Prospect Heights, but then in another decade I'd be voting with Bay Ridge and other neighborhoods in the South. And if you think about the different populations that might be at play there, that says something. And so we wanted to kind of make an impression on people to think very seriously about their district and what that means, and then the local races that come with that. There's different districts for local races, but still kind of at play.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of curious, how many people in the audience know which district they're in, just offhand? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe what do you say, half maybe?
Yeah.
How many people can name their DA? I mean, I think the number of people raising their hands is probably I'm guessing double than it would have been 4 to 6 years ago, because the criminal, the smart justice, what we call the smart justice movement, but the the movement to reduce mass incarceration has really become much more visible in the past 4 years. And the fact that your DA is the person who has the most power, almost the most power in that, is I think now gone mainstream, and I think that's just great. People are now really being thoughtful about it when they go to the ballot box.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, full disclosure, I didn't know which district I was in until the midterm elections, and I was when am I supposed to be voting? And it was really hard to find, actually, and I actually did not come across the ACLU's tool. I wish I had. And I guess that just kind of gets me to, like, these are awesome tools, and like, how can you make sure that people actually know that they exist?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that the organization needs to mature a bit on. I mean, I think we're a traditional nonprofit. We are 99 years old. We're a multi-issue organization. We have over 50 affiliate offices, 1,500 people throughout the country, many of them lawyers, lobbyists, and now organizers. And so thinking about how to promote like product work and digital work is something that we're kind of learning right now. And actually, I look to the people in this room, people in tech nonprofits, people in private nonprofits who have very mature marketing operations. Like the ACLU is looking at that and thinking, hey, we need to be doing a better job of how we're getting the tools out there that both uplift our work and also uplift the work of our communities. So it's something we're working on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say one thing we're kind of experimenting with a few projects on now is when we ask people to share links to our work or to what the district or to other campaign work, we usually try to avoid the like stock message where you click on a Twitter button and it says like, look at this cool thing, and it's like very clear that it's this form message, right? As others have mentioned earlier today, it's about the personal story. It's about the emotion behind any given person's own life experience that matters. So we've been experimenting on a few projects now to allow people to type in, share a little bit about their own story and why this is important to them, and then to have them share out a link tied to that.
Yeah, so what we're doing right now is what we're calling the Rights for All campaign. So in terms of the presidential primaries, which is taking up a lot of the public energy right now, we're encouraging our supporters and volunteers to go to the town halls of the presidential primary candidates. Right now, it's mostly on the Democratic side. Maybe soon there'll be primary candidates on the Republican side. But asking our supporters to ask questions about civil rights and civil liberties, and sort of feeding them questions that we think they might ask, but also giving them the opportunity to write their own. And then we're going to be looking at collecting video clips and such and compiling these to show how the candidates are responding to the ACLU priority issues.
Okay, and then kind of displaying that on the site in like an interactive way.
Yeah, and then when they change their position in the future, we have something to point to, right?
Nice.
So we're actually thinking of creative ways to actually show that visually over time. Because it's interesting to see like how like some of the more like progressive candidates start to shift the opinions of the more center candidates, and then like there's almost like you can almost map like how the political opinion changes over the months of the primary season.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And so obviously the ACLU cares quite a bit about privacy. So like as you're developing these new tools, like what are the privacy considerations that you take into account?
Yeah, this is something that from the very beginning when I was at the ACLU was always a primary concern. And like for a nonprofit like the EFF, for example, like they also have this concern, but it's almost everyone that works at the EFF probably thinks that way. Where at the ACLU, because we're multi-issue, we have people that work on privacy issues, and that's like primary for them. But then we have people that work on, reproductive freedom or racial justice, where it's not that privacy doesn't have a role with those issues, but that's not their primary mode of thinking. So it's always been a challenge to think about how we build technology in a way that avoids the corporate surveillance world, and that's something that we take seriously. So for instance, the voter site, right, we had the ability for people to find the polling location, and the best source of that information is the Google Voter Project. But we didn't want to just make requests to Google just without people consenting into it. So we're very careful to tell people, okay, like if you want to know this information, this data is coming from Google, you can consent to it and get it. So it's sort of like a semi-GDPR model, but we're not, it's not quite that structured. But the ACLU is involved in looking at a national privacy regulation, building on top of what California has done. And so I think we're going to have more to say on that.
Okay.
Yeah, and it also affects like the vendors that we talk to and who we can work with and incorporate into our projects. There's often in the privacy policy clauses for many tech services a provision about they'll provide information on people that are on no-fly lists or other kinds of government lists. And since we're often defending a lot of people who might be on those lists, we can't work with those companies, or we will ask them to change their policy.
So anyone in here who like takes a terms of service and like copy paste it from another one that they've seen, I beseech you to think seriously about that kind of language about your users not being on government lists, because one, you have to think about like how people get on this list, whether there's a fair appeal process, and that's something that we work on. But second, organizations like ours actually do represent people that are people that we believe should not be on those lists who are, and then often we get waivers from the government to use technologies, even though those people may be on those lists, and we're working for those people on the list. So it's even like a small bit of boilerplate language in a terms of service can have massive impact, and so we're doing a lot of behind-the-scenes advocacy on things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and I mean, how does that all kind of impact your product development timeline?
That is a good question. Yeah, I mean, that is, especially for the, Alan, I mean, maybe you can answer this because you came from a different world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have a good answer to that, except that we try to do a lot of that procurement work up front, and we have projects that are smaller or medium term that often we have to get out the door. And this is similar to like the journalism space, where a story has to be published on Monday or a given deadline, and you kind of have to figure out what you can do within that time frame. We don't have the luxury of waiting often.
Yeah, and I mean, and so that also just kind of gets me to my next question. I mean, like you came from the New York Times and then decided to pursue work at a nonprofit organization. And I mean, as you're building out this tech team, I mean, you're competing also with like the likes of like Google and Slack and Airbnb for talent. And so what's the recruiting process been like?
Yeah, I mean, I can say that, the difference between recruiting between 2012 and 2015 and 2017 and today, it's vast. Like, I would be looking for a senior engineer. I would post a position. I'd have to post it 3 times, change the title, like kind of do all these creative things, like try to get recruiting help. And it was very difficult to get even like a single like strong candidate. This was before the election. Now you have a bunch of people from the tech world that are dissatisfied with where they're working, and so it's been a lot easier. The pools have been a lot richer. I still think we're seeing more progress with some of the younger folks that we're interviewing, people that are like coming in for internship positions. They're coming from schools where when I was in college there was no public interest tech group. There was no technology and ethics group, and today there's many of those things at colleges. There's this public interest technology university coalition that was announced 3 weeks ago, I think, or maybe a month ago. So like our lawyers have a huge pipeline of people that are great, have great legal skills, and also have dedicated themselves to a public interest career. That's been less so on the technology side, but we're starting to see that change, and it's really exciting. I hope other people here have been seeing that change.
Yeah, and I mean, what kind of roles are you generally looking for? I mean, you're just kind of looking for like the full suite of...
It's product managers, designers, engineers.
Yeah, we look for people who don't have like a singular focus on just design or just engineering or just product. People who have strange backgrounds. We have folks on our team who used to be cartographers, lots of mapping people. We have people who used to work in civic tech, and those communities have really like developed significantly in the past few years, and it has also made hiring like a lot easier.
Nice. And I'm going to open it up to audience Q&A. So just start thinking about your questions. But one more from me for you all. So far, a lot of the tools that you've built have been very like election and like voting oriented. Do you envision like tackling like other issues like racial justice or like reproductive rights on your tech team?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, we've done a few smaller hits on some of those other issues. So for immigration rights during the family separation crisis, which is still ongoing in other ways. But when it really first blew up, we were doing a project with our data team about showing where the ports of entry are around the country and how many families were separated, how many children were separated. We've done projects for
School discipline.
So like they've been a lot of like data-oriented, smaller projects. What our major issue will be for 2020, we actually really don't. We haven't decided yet. The focus has been more on the broader set of issues with the primary candidates. The other focus right now, which is less specific issue-oriented, is next year as ACLU's 100th anniversary. So we have an archivist who's pulling a lot of photos and other media of our history, our landmark cases, the landmark bills that we helped pass, and we're going to be working on some, hopefully, innovative ways for people to explore that content.
Yeah, and also probably launching later this month is a revamped section on our site that's more evergreen content. It's a section called Know Your Rights. So it's a series of guides for what to do if you're in certain situations, what to do if you're going to a protest, what happens if ICE shows up to your door. So a lot of that content gets a lot of attention due to like immigration or due to students protesting the lack of gun control action. And yeah, we're hoping that that will have a big impact.
Nice. Awesome. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, it looks like we got one right there.
Hi, my name is Jenny Williams. I work at Google, just neither here nor there for this question. But I'm curious, you talk a lot about your sort of digital outreach strategies, but given the digital divide in the country, and there's a lot of people who may be disproportionately affected by the very issues that you're trying to address, who don't have access to the digital products that you're working on. Do you have or how do you sort of approach that partnership in your organization to kind of to tackle that as a comprehensive approach as opposed to sort of one or the other?
I mean, because we're an organization that's been around a long time, we're not a digital first organization, right? So our affiliates, in particular our state affiliate offices, already are doing direct work with communities, with clients in vulnerable communities. That is sort of what the ACLU does. So how that translates to the work that we do, like for example, sharing our Know Your Rights content. I mean, that's a really great question. We've focused a lot on making our content accessible with people with disabilities, but when it comes to the digital divide, it's hard to leap across that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say with that project in particular, we know that a lot of our organizers use Know Your Rights content as well, and they print it out in little booklets and they pass it out as training materials. So we definitely were cognizant of supporting that use case, for example. Yeah.
Cool. Looks like we have one right over here in the blue.
Hi, Caroline Barlern from Eventbrite. ACLU, thanks for all the amazing work you do. I presume also on your 2020 maybe something around the census. And
Yes.
I'm just curious, just to shine a light on the fact that there's a lot of investment going in the census, but I don't know if tech is focused on the census and also the funders in the room investing in the platforms that could help accelerate attention on the census. So I'd love to hear what you all are doing in that front. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, the ACLU's been heavily involved in the citizenship question part of the census. We're been in the courts, but in terms of what's happening next year with the census completion rates, I actually don't know too much about what our priorities are in that space. And I actually had a conversation with someone who's in this room. Is Jim Fuchterman in this room right now from Tech Matters? Yeah, here he is in the back. He just brought up this to me last week, and he said, "Hey, like this is something that are you guys thinking about this?" So the answer is, I'm going to go talk to some people at the organization in the next few weeks and ask around and say, "Hey, what are we doing in this space?" Because I don't really know what our priorities are as an organization there. Yeah, beyond the citizenship question.
All right, I think we probably have time for one more question. Looks like one right back there.
Hi, my name is Disney, and I work at Postmates, which is also neither here nor there for this question. So before working at a tech company, I worked in nonprofits, and one of the things that I always find really interesting is why a lot of people move into tech is for compensation. So when you're talking about recruiting, one of the big things that comes up is people are like, oh, I'm not really sure if I want to work in a nonprofit or in the tech nonprofit space because I could go work at a traditional tech company and make more money. So how do you all answer that question? Or do you find that the purpose piece of the work really takes care of that? Or are you actually paying competitive rates to tech companies? And if you are, we should be advertising that.
Well, we're not paying Google rates, that's for sure.
No, we're pretty upfront with people that it's going to be lower than what you'd get at for profit. But I think what we're also trying to convince people that it's higher than you think it is, right? I think a lot of people have an impression that working at a nonprofit, what the salaries are, and let's talk to us and let's talk about it. I mean, this was something that when I stepped into this role was a huge priority of mine. One of the first asks was we need to pay more competitively. And that's something that we've been able to do more. I'm also part of, very recently, in the past 6 months, been part of the network of CTOs for Good. And so being able to talk to other CTOs of tech nonprofits and sharing some information about what people's salaries are and how competitive it is has been very helpful for myself, but also to make a case with leadership at the organization. So it's something that, yes, if that's the reason why you're not applying for a job at the ACLU, please apply and let's talk and we may surprise you.
Okay.
Yeah, the other thing that I think people working at large tech companies talk about a lot is the scale. And I would say the one advantage we have at the ACLU is we're also a huge organization. We have 54 affiliates. We're nationwide. So we also have some scale that is helpful when recruiting.
We are unfortunately out of time, but thank you so much to the both of you.
Thank you, man.